Hello, book friends. Terry from Terri Talks Books, or Ms. Terry B here on YouTube. Welcome or welcome back. Today I'm reviewing a book that I read in October for my book club. Yes, it's taken me a while to get to the review. There are two reasons for that. The first one is that there were some complexities to the storytelling and the structure of this book that required me to dwell on it for a bit. The second reason is that I tend to do analytic reviews, which take me longer to put together because I'm analyzing. I am diving deeper. I am talking about themes. I am talking about structure. I am talking about things that I think are important to understanding the story and the message that's being put out there. So because of that, they tend to be a little bit more academic, though I try to minimize that. I don't want to scare you all away. And they also tend to include some spoilers. It's really hard to analyze a book without talking about things. So I do try to minimize that. I don't want to spoil everything for you. And analytic reviews also are reviews that are really targeted at the person who's read the book. I find them sometimes useful even if I haven't read the book. So this is all up to you, what you're comfortable with, and you won't hurt my feelings if you want to come back later after you've read the book, or if you just aren't interested in this kind of review. So what book am I talking about? What am I reviewing today? I am going to be talking about Trust by Hernan Diaz. This was published in 2022. And as you can see from the obnoxious non-sticker sticker on here, it won the Pulitzer Prize. So I will hold this just for another moment longer because I'm going to sit it down and pick up my notes. I need my notes for this. So here we go. I am going to set you up a little bit and talk about the setting, which is New York City, spanning a century from the effervescent, roaring 1920s to more or less current day. And then the characters. The two main characters in this are Andrew and Mildred Bevel. I say main characters because there are other significant characters in this, but the story really revolves around Andrew and Mildred. And there is a bit of a mystery to this, not a whodunit type mystery, but a mystery nonetheless. And you might get some clues as to what that is as I talk. But Andrew and Mildred are really at the center of this, so I'm just going to kind of be focused on that, their characters here. And then the basic plot, the basic synopsis is Andrew and Mildred Bevel's rise to the top of the ultra-wealthy, what I call the American aristocracy. Think Vanderbilt, only Andrew and Mildred did not inherit their wealth nor their status, their social status. They worked for that. And so this is the story of that rise. Okay, so that's your most basic of basics there. Something important to know is the structure of the book. I think is very crucial to understanding this book. So I'm going to talk about it a little bit before I get into themes and try to tie some things together. So the story is told in 4 parts. So books 1 through 4. Each one is from a different perspective. And we start out, book 1 is 1920s. And what we have is a novel within a novel. So we're getting meta. Okay, so book 1 is a novel inside this novel. And the title of that novel is Bonds, written by Harold Vanner. And it is a fictionalized account of Andrew and Mildred Bevel's life and their rise, their gain of wealth and their rise in status. And in that novel, he names them Benjamin and Helen Rask. So that will now lead me into book 2, which is set 1938. And it is a memoir by Andrew Bevell, or the writing of the memoir, I should say, not the memoir itself, but the writing of the memoir of Andrew Bevell by Bevell himself, because he did not like what Harold Vanner put out there in the 20s about him and his wife, not so secretly cloaked as Benjamin and Helen Rask. Everybody knows who these characters are in real life, of course. So our character Andrew here, he is not a happy camper. He is not happy with Harold Vanner. And so he wants to write a memoir in order to, as a rebuttal, in order to set the record straight. So he hires a young woman named Ida Pertenza. I think she is in her 20s at this time, and he hires her to basically ghostwrite. So he's going to dictate to her, and then she'll talk to him a little bit and take that dictation off, type it up, do some edits, which he's approved. Yes, as you type this up, you can edit, and brings them back to their next session, where Andrew then can yay or nay on the edits and things like that. So he needs to approve of this as they go along. So that is what's happening in book 2. So that is all just the creation of Andrew Bevell's memoir in 1938. Book 3. Skip forward to 1981. This is a memoir of sorts, just within the context of the novel. So remembrances by our character Ida Partenza, who is now an older woman. She's in her 70s. It's 1981. And she is remembering her time spent with and working for Andrew Bevell, writing his memoir. I cannot remember if that memoir ever got published. Ooh, I can't remember. It's been a couple of months. So we have flashbacks. What we have is Ida Pertenza is walking down the street. She's going to the Bevell home, which is it's a very posh, very large, posh home, New York City, on one of those posh streets. I don't know, Park Avenue, Madison, Fifth Avenue, something like that. I don't know my New York City streets. But she is on her way there. That home has been turned into a museum because by now, 1981, Andrew has died. And the home has been turned into a museum. So Ida is on her way there, and her mission is to look for the papers of Mildred. Remember Mildred? I keep mentioning Andrew, but his wife, Mildred. Okay, so she's portrayed one way in book 1, right? In the fictionalized account as Helen Rask. Then in book 2, Andrew's writing the memoir, and it becomes very clear. It becomes very clear that, to Ida, that Andrew is telling the story. He wants the story to be told. Not necessarily the truth. That'll come in a little later with some themes that I'm going to talk about. So then here we are in 1981. We're in book 3 here, and Ida is looking for Mildred's papers. What does Mildred have to say about this? Well, Mildred had already died by the time Andrew got around to writing his memoir. So we really don't know. So Ida wants to find her papers. So she gets to the museum, and they help her find the papers, and she starts going through those papers, and she finds a diary. So she's gathering information from receipts and other things, pieces of paperwork that are, in with Mildred's papers that have to do with her charitable work or, whatever she was doing. But there's this little book she finds. It says Futures. So the novel that's in the novel, Bonds, okay? And then the diary just says futures on the front. And I thought that was kind of interesting because we're dealing with the markets in New York City and the gaining of wealth through the stock market and bonds and things like that. So, yeah, it turns out to be Mildred's diary. And nobody's really looked at it because Mildred's writing apparently is really horrific. Ida's motivated, so she goes through that diary. Then book 4 is Mildred's perspective. Yay, finally, we get to hear from the woman herself. And we get to see the entries in her diary, of course, via Ida. But book 4 is from the perspective of Mildred. We finally get to hear from her. Now, I was suspecting some things before I got to book 4. I thought, I bet this was really what happened. I had my suspicions. So this is kind of where it's got a bit of a mystery. And the mystery is really tied up with one of the themes, or both of the themes that I'm going to talk about here. The first one is bending and aligning with reality. Big theme. Who's telling the truth? We've got 4 perspectives. Who's telling the truth? What in the world is Vanner doing? He writes about a fictionalized account of Andrew and his wife. Well, he's writing a fiction, so he can bend and align reality however he wants, right? And then Andrew comes along, well, I'm going to set the record straight. I'm writing my memoir. Well, he's over there bending and aligning reality himself. So I'm going to read to you out of here. I'm reading in my copy, page 288. I don't know if that will help you at all or not. But the setting here is Ida is recounting to us here what Andrew Bevel said to her while working on his memoir. So Andrew says, could you be implying that my actions are gratuitous? I'd finally managed to anger him. Are you saying, perhaps, that I am moved by spite, revenge, or even worse, that I am seeking some sort of perverse thrill in cruelty? It seems to me that you don't understand what our work here is about. It seems to me that you don't understand what any of this is all about, he says to Ida. I do, she says. Is that so? She says, bending and aligning reality. At the time, I was not entirely sure if the phrase applied to the situation, but I did know that most men enjoy hearing themselves quoted. Exactly, Andrew says. And reality needs to be consistent. How incongruous would it be to find traces of Vanner in a world where Vanner never existed? For the first time since meeting Andrew Bevel, it occurred to me that I should be afraid. What's this man doing? He's pretty angry. And he's bending and aligning reality, and he does not see a problem with that. He does not see that there's a problem with that. So that's a really big theme. And as we go through this, we're trying to figure out who's telling the truth? What is being bent? How are things being aligned? Okay. The second theme I'll mention here is inverted truth and reality. Let me see. How can I set this up? Okay, I'm going to read my book. It's page 290, a little over onto 291. And who is she talking to? I think she is talking to her father. Ida is at home having a meal with her father. He is a printer. He works a printing press. With his respect came a newfound curiosity. So her father has a newfound respect for her through her work. And he's very curious about what she's doing, and she cannot tell. She's not allowed to tell what it is she's working on. That was part of the agreement with Andrew Bevel. So the dad, with his respect came a newfound curiosity. Our quick lunches got longer as his questions multiplied. At first, they all had to do with the technical side of my job. Was it not remarkable, he wondered, that we both had ended up working with type, a typesetter and a typist, working side by side? During these talks, we discovered many shared qualities in our trades, and we discussed how they shaped our perception of the world. I told him, for instance, how I had come to experience time differently. The word I was typing was always in the past, while the word I was thinking of was always in the future, which left the present oddly uninhabited. He could relate to this. As he fed one piece of type into the composing stick, he was spotting the nick and face of the next one. Now, did not seem to exist. He also told me the biggest influence of his work in his life had been that it had taught him to see the world backward. This was the main thing typesetters and revolutionaries had in common. They knew the matrix of the world was reversed, and even if reality was inverted, they could make sense of it at first glance. There's a lot there. There is a lot there in that paragraph. So if you don't know, back when they used to print things, things were sent to a typesetter, and they would physically put letters in to the press, I guess, a letter at a time, a character at a time. And you do everything backwards so that when it printed out the correct direction. So you're looking at everything backwards as you set it up. So that's what's going on there. And then it's compared to revolutionaries and this invertedness of truth and reality. I just thought that was an interesting bit, and that really is the main theme here. Then we have, let's see, yes, this is a little bit later. This one's on page 330, and our character Ida is, she is in the Bevel home. Mildred had already passed away, and she wasn't really supposed to be wandering around, but she did. Mildred's door was always kept closed, so she managed to get in there to examine Mildred's room because she's having her suspicions at this point about the story Andrew was telling her for his memoir. The few pieces of furniture derived their elegance from their quiet functionality, and the intensity of the place came from the impression that every object and its placement was logically necessary. I walked around, trying to feel like Mildred, but having no idea what that meant. No trace of the journals that, according to Vanner's novel, she had kept all her life. There were few hiding spots in those ascetic rooms, with their mostly empty shelves and tabletops. Foolishly, I even looked in the closets where her clothes were wrapped up in their hangers, feeling the sleeves and pockets of some of her coats as if she, like me, would have hidden her writings within them. The bookcase might hold some clues, even though I was sure the books would be unread, perhaps with their pages uncut. I was wrong. They were all heavily underlined in pencil, dog-eared, spotted with tea or coffee. Some of them were in French, others in German, and even Italian, which made me feel unreasonably close to Mildred. Many were inscribed by their authors, whose names at the time I did not know and therefore did not retain. Harold Vanner was not among them. I leafed through volume after volume, pausing on underscored passages here and there, hoping they would tell me something about the reader. I went over to the desk, sat down, and looked at the portion of the park that Mildred must have seen every day out her window. There was the bench under the tree where I had sat after my first session with Bevel and counted my pay. The desk drawers were unlocked. Stationery, blotting paper, pencils. The blotting paper caught my attention. It was covered in a multitude of words, numbers, and symbols, traced and retraced chaotically on top of one another in purple ink. Everything was backward, of course. I thought of my father and his inverted truth. I put the blotting paper in my pocket right before Miss Clifford returned to take me to see the flowers. So again, blotting paper was used because you would write usually fountain pen, and so they could be kind of inky, and you used a blotting paper. So again, with the backwards, the inversion. So you'd have to be able to read it backwards. So again, I thought that was just a very interesting theme that plays into this whole thing. It's like, who's telling the truth? And all of that just plays into the whole mystery at the heart of the novel. And we've got 4 perspectives. We've got Vanner in his novel, Bonds, about Bevel and his wife. We have Bevel. What did I write here? In his conversations with Ida regarding the writing of his memoir. Okay, so we've got that perspective. We have Ida in her telling about both past and present. And then we have Mildred herself in her diary, through her diary entries. So a voice from the past who was there. She was actually there. And she has no reason to be making anything up, really. So that's the mystery. Who's telling the truth? I thought when I got to the end of it that I understood the truth of it. I'm pretty sure it can be known. But I don't want to talk about that too much. Now, what I'm going to tell you next is that I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. I rounded it up to a 4, but I made a note. And I'm thinking of changing that rating. I don't know if I'll just leave it like that or not. But after spending some time thinking about this, in order to make this video, I thought I wanted to reread this book. That book was better than I thought it was as I thought about it and what's going on. It was a lot more clever. So that is my review of Trust by Hernan Diaz. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you've read this book. Have you ever read a book, not been impressed, and then thought about it, maybe even gone back and reread it and changed your mind? Let's talk in the comments below. See you later, book friends. Bye-bye.